Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is time for another edition of the Curtain Call podcast. My name is Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, joined with, as always, one Mr. Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, how are you doing tonight?
Great. It's one of my favorite days of the year, Cinco de Mayo. Woo, party time. Having fun.
Oh, and you know we love to have fun here on the show, and what better way to celebrate than with the special guest talking a little bit of Alabama football and specifically Najee Harris. Tonight we got Charlie Potter, from Bama Online 24/7 joining us. Charlie, how are you?
I'm great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. And once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight and talking about one of the Pittsburgh Steelers' newest players. I guess just right off the top, Charlie, what kind of player did the Steelers get in Najee Harris?
Yeah, I think Najee's a complete back. He's a guy that he had to wait his turn a little bit at Alabama, which is, not uncommon the way Alabama recruits. But he was a guy that played as a true freshman. He came in and was really a key part of that national championship game in 2018 for the 2017 season. A bunch of true freshmen were on the field for that. And then, when he turned into a junior, he took over that number one back role, and he's been that the last 2 years for Alabama. And I think it was on full display this past season, just his ability to catch the ball in the backfield, to be a blocker. I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of that as this continues. But I just think he's a complete player, and he's just an overall good dude. I mean, he's a little bit of a different cat. He likes to speak his mind sometimes, but he's always going to give back to the community. And on top of being a hell of a player, he seems like a really good person.
Comparing him to other running backs in Alabama's recent history, because there's a lot of them that have come into the NFL. What makes him different? Like, who is he similar to, and what makes him different from the other guys?
I think he has a lot of characteristics of a lot of the Alabama backs that we've seen have success in the NFL. You just look at the guys that have been taken toward the top of the draft. I think he's obviously a bigger back at 6'2", 230. So everyone harkens back to Derrick Henry. I don't think they're the same player quite as much, but I think that Naji also has some of the traits of a Josh Jacobs, a Kenyon Drake that can catch the ball in the backfield. So I think he's almost like a melting pot of all those guys. He's a bowling ball, like a Mark Ingram. I think that he also has the different characteristic of he likes to hurdle. He's a guy that doesn't like to get hit low, and he's found a way to do something about that. I'm not sure how long that will last, how effective that'll be in the NFL. I'm sure he can do it a few times, but he has his own way, and he is a different back. But I do see shades of different Alabama backs that have had success both in Tuscaloosa and on into the league.
So you mentioned his size, of course. It's easy to perhaps call someone of his stature as a tailback and classify him as a power back. Is that fair, or would you call him more of a finesse style, or does he kind of just do his own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think he does his own thing. Najee's a unique individual, both on and off the field, and he does have power. He runs behind his pads. He can be that power back at the 6'2", 230, but he's also shifty. I think that's something he definitely worked on throughout his career. It's something that helped him at Antioch whenever he was a 5-star recruit. And I know just leading up to this senior year, which was important to him because he came back to Alabama to improve his draft stock, which is work on that explosive ability. He spent time in the offseason working with a bunch of different players. And, I think that was on display. I mean, he can make guys miss. His stiff arm is lethal. Again, we talked about the hurdles. I think that goes to show that he's not just a guy that's going to run through you, but he can run over you, literally, like jump over you. But I think that the bigger size, it slows him down a bit. He's not just a home run hitter, but he's a guy that can do everything else. I think he's worked on that acceleration, and his speed maybe improved a little bit. Again, though, the explosive ability is there for Najee. He can go around, through, over, whatever way he wants to get by a defender.
Now, Najee, is one of the most interesting comments I read about him during the draft process was someone said if he wasn't such a great runner, you could play him at an H-back position because he can run block and he can get out there, and he's a really good receiver. What did Najee bring to Alabama as a receiver? Did he ever line up on the line? Did he ever go out, and line up as in a receiving spot, or was he mostly just a receiver out of the backfield?
He did that a little bit. I wouldn't say that was just like a usual or commonplace occurrence, but he's a guy that they would split out wide some and use him in that aspect. He is really good at providing pass protection in the backfield, and he's a guy too. I mean, we saw it a few times. He slip out of the backfield and run a wheel route and be effective in that regard. But yeah, I think that again, the receiving aspect is something that he hangs his hat on, and I think it's often a question with him that it gets brought up of has that something that you've been working on? Is that something that's maybe new to your game? And he would sometimes take offense to that. I remember back when we could do interviews, so I guess that was in the 2019 season, someone brought up that exact question to him, and he just kind of looked at him and he's like, you're just now seeing this. I've always been able to do it. So he takes pride in that receiving ability. And I think he is a guy that can move all over the formation and be used in a lot of ways in the passing game.
So when we talk about Najee Harris, there's clearly a lot of things he can do, from running the ball, catching the ball, blocking. What would you say is his best trait as a football player, and what do you expect him to be most successful at the next level?
That's tough because he does do a lot of things really well. And I think for a running back too, he did what was asked of him. And, in this day and age, especially the college game, I know the NFL is a little different. A lot of people take a by committee approach, but he's a selfless guy. And being a former 5-star recruit, going to a place like Alabama, that's not always the case. And I think he's just willing to do whatever's necessary. But from a trait aspect, I do think his shiftiness, his elusiveness, his explosive ability is maybe underrated because he is a big, powerful back. He does have that receiving ability, but Najee will make a guy miss, and I think that's probably one of the things that gets undervalued to some extent. It's really tough to really pinpoint one thing that he does better than everything else because he does do everything so well.
Now, Steeler fans, one of the people we have heard and been internally comparing Najee Harris to is Le'Veon Bell, because Najee clearly shows patience. He has that strength to run through arm tackles. He follows blocks well. He has that great vision, and obviously he's a really good receiver. Do you think that's a good comparison? Are you familiar? I'm assuming are familiar at least with Le'Veon Bell at all in the NFL. But do you think that's at all a fair comparison, that he can bring that same kind of a game to an NFL team?
I think so. I think, of course, in terms of just getting ready for the draft, comparisons are always going to be thrown out there. And I think Le'Veon's a very good comparison. The two that I thought were maybe the most accurate was that. And then some people likened him to a Matt Forte that played with the Browns and, came from Tulane. I think they're both bigger guys that do have that ability to shake off defenders. Like you said, I think their vision is something that is imperative for their success. And I think that, comparing players isn't always fair, but I think those have been pretty spot on just in terms of what he can maybe be at the next level.
So it's really easy to talk about all his strengths because clearly there's a lot of them. And really this time of the year, there's so much positivity going around. We don't hear too much about his weaknesses. So if you could pinpoint one thing that he needs to work on, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's probably tough to work on, but he doesn't have that home run ability. He has plenty of ability. He can reel off long runs, but I think before this past season, his longest run at Alabama in his first 3 years was maybe 35 yards or under. And he eclipsed that a couple times this past season. And again, that's something that he worked on this offseason, is just getting faster, getting stronger, getting more explosive. But, you look at a guy, we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, just the Alabama players he's been compared to, or maybe that he has some traits that they have. Derrick Henry is a big back, but you don't really see Derrick Henry getting caught from behind a lot. So I think that's something that Najee, I think he can get better at it. Maybe he gets to the NFL, he drops a couple pounds or something like that and just, picks up a little bit more speed. But, he's not, I don't think he's going to be a guy that we're going to see reel off a lot of, 50, 60, 70-yard runs to the next level.
As a part of the Alabama offense, obviously they had the four first round picks from both receivers, Naji and the quarterback. How did he fit into that offense? Was he a guy who kind of drove that offense, or was he more a guy who benefited, the run game benefited from having those two great receivers? Or did Alabama use him to kind of set the tone for the game and run the pass off of him?
I think it was complimentary. Early on, I think if it had all been chalk and a guy like Jalen Waddle didn't get hurt in the Tennessee game, then maybe it would lean more on the passing game. Now, we're saying that, and we're talking about a season where Alabama had a wide receiver win the Heisman Trophy. But, Najee's a guy that came in and rewrote the record books as well. He was a guy that it was an oddity to see him not score multiple touchdowns in a game. And I think they leaned on him quite a bit, especially after that Waddle injury. And, I think with Mac Jones and Devontae Smith and some of the weapons they had throughout the season, to have that running game to lean on was very beneficial. It's why they had one of the best offenses we've seen at Alabama. And so I don't think it was one took away from the other, or one was the star of the show in certain situations. I think they complemented each other really well, which is something that going to the next level in a place like Pittsburgh with a proven quarterback and some good wide receivers, I think Najee can do that same thing.
So the Alabama offensive line was clearly the best in the nation a year ago. They'll have another first-round tackle, probably a top 5 pick next year even, to extend on just how talented that group was. But playing behind a unit that could blow open some humongous holes for him to run through, do you think there's a chance for some worry if he's faced with an offensive line that might be a little bit more porous? And do you think he might be a little phased by not having the easy run lanes to run through, I guess you could say?
I think it'll definitely be an adjustment for him because, you're right. Alabama, the past 2 seasons has had really good offensive lines. And I do think that Najee's vision, his elusiveness, his ability to see things and react quickly will help. But again, it depends on, what that offensive line in Pittsburgh can do. So I do think it could be maybe rocky early on for him. As many reps and as much experience he can get in practice and in camp and the preseason are going to be beneficial. But yeah, I think it could be a little bit of an adjustment period because coming from a place like Alabama, to go to, I don't want to say, lesser units, but you have the best of the best combined for one offensive line. And I think, the same can go for a lot of Alabama's players. Like you look at the wide receivers, they're going to teams that need wide receiver help, and they're going to be probably the number one guys that are going to be targeted. It could be an adjustment period for them too. I think Najee's still going to be able to see success in the NFL, but I do think it's going to be maybe a little bit of a wake-up call, like, oh, I'm not running behind a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line anymore.
For Najee, he stayed all 4 years at Alabama, which is a pretty rare thing, especially for Alabama running backs to be there 4 years. How was that viewed in, Alabama football? Was that kind of this guy's just not that good? Or was that a thing where he came back and people were really excited that he came back?
You're right. It is a rarity. And if you would have told me when Najee committed to Alabama, and he was committed to Alabama for a long time, and then he just showed up on campus after the Army All-America game. So once he did that, if you had told me he'd be there for 4 years, I wouldn't really believed it. He just seemed like a 3-and-done kind of player that he was going to go, do his business and be a first-round draft pick. But I think a lot of the players, himself included, were very disappointed with the 2019 season. And that says a lot because Alabama only lost 2 games. They wanted to end things the right way, that 2017 class especially. And that's a class now that has 8 first-round draft picks from it, including 2 quarterbacks and 3 wide receivers. But I think that group, so you had Najee Harris, Devontae Smith, Alex Leatherwood, so 3 first-round picks, and then Dylan Moses. All 4 of them decided to come back for their senior year, and that was huge for Alabama. And I don't know if they had conversations with each other or they just decided that, hey, we want to come back and finish things the right way. But it was a decision that I think obviously benefited Alabama, but benefited most of those players. I don't know if Najee would have been a first-round draft pick in the 2020 draft, but obviously he was the first running back off the board, so it turned out to be a wise business decision. But at the same time, they came back He was a guy that was a vocal leader, both on the field and off the field. We saw him at the front of the march for the Black Lives Matter on campus. He was one of the leading voices of trying to get the season to actually happen for some of the top Power 5 players. And I think Najee really matured this past year. And on top of being able to win a national championship and get his degree, he improved his draft stock. So I think it was one of those decisions that Alabama fans will look back on and appreciate for a long time. But I think Najee, in hindsight now, knows that it was a wise decision for him to come back for his senior year.
After the Steelers drafted Najee Harris, there was some interviews amongst the front office staff, and they specifically singled out when he drove 9 hours to be at the first Alabama Pro Day just to support his guys. Well, what did that mean to really that unit for him to make that effort to be there? And is that just something that you kind of expect from Najee because he's just that dude?
Yeah, I think we don't get to see their true personalities as reporters, especially during the 2020 season with everything being like this virtually and over Zoom and everything like that. But I think he's really well liked in that locker room. And to be a guy that was obviously dealing with that ankle issue that kept him from participating in the Senior Bowl down in Mobile, for him to be working out and doing everything in Texas and to drive just to be there and support his teammates, I think it's a great example of who he is as a teammate and who he is as a person. And I know everybody's seen what he did leading up to the draft and on draft night, hosting. It just goes to show, what kind of dude he is and, what he'll do for his teammates. And I think that seeing that people that are going to be welcoming him into a new locker room, they have to be, feeling pretty good about what he's going to bring to the table from a teammate standpoint.
Now, I know Nick Saban builds a lot of leadership into his players. That's a big deal in his program. Did Najee really stand out in that regard, or is he another in a long line of players coming out of Alabama that have that ingrained into them?
Yeah, I mean, I think this past season there were a lot of really strong leaders. Najee wasn't one of the 4 team captains, but I think he could, if they would have done 5, I think he could have easily been in there. Again, it goes back to what happened before the season even started and for the season even happening, because he was very adamant about wanting to play. He was very vocal about that, and he was before that really a quiet guy. He wasn't a guy that went on social media and did much. And so to do that and kind of speak for his teammates because of his platform and who he is and how well known he is, the notoriety behind his name, I think says a lot about his maturity. And then again, with the demonstration they did on campus for social justice, he was at the forefront right there beside Nick Saban, and spoke at the rally they had. I think it just shows how far he's come, and I do think that Nick Saban, can pull a lot out of players. You're just talking about this spring, and we've heard from a lot of guys, and they're obviously having to replace people. Just look at the NFL draft, but. I think one player said, Coach Saban hasn't found his leaders yet. And I think Najee was one of those guys this past year, because in talking about the 2020 team and the success that they had, Saban always kind of points back to senior leadership, and that includes Najee Harris. It obviously includes the guys up front of the offensive line, guys like Landon Dickerson and Alex Leatherwood, Mac Jones being the quarterback, and Devontae Smith was a 2-time captain. But I think for Najee, to be someone that would kind of avoided the limelight as a recruit and kind of kept low throughout his career at Alabama, just in terms of exposure to the public or to the media, social media, anything like that, the development and the maturation over this past season just goes to show how he's matured as a leader. And I think he's a guy that a lot of those young players on that team look to point them in the right direction this past season.
A little bit earlier in the show, you mentioned Najee Harris missing the Senior Bowl, of course, with that ankle injury. Has he ever been one to miss time with injury, or has he had a relatively healthy college career?
Yeah, I mean, before that, I don't really know of anything, at least outside of, bumps and bruises or things like that. I mean, he's a guy the past 2 years has led Alabama in carries. He's had 200-plus carries the past 2 seasons. So, maybe you see him in practice, with a black no-contact jersey. He maybe takes some time off, but he doesn't miss game time. He's the guy that always wants to be out there. again, it goes back to what we were talking about driving from Dallas to pro day. He wants to be there for his teammates and to be available. And the ankle issue, I think, is something that he played through toward the end of the season and even tried to go out to the Senior Bowl and practice with. And then Jim Nagy, the executive director, kind of shut him down, pulled him to the side, and they talked about it. And he obviously didn't play in the game, but he stayed down there in Mobile and was supportive. But yeah, I mean, he doesn't have a lot of injury history. He's a guy that, while he has been the bell cow the past 2 years, I think he still has a lot of tread on his tires. So I don't think that's really an issue going to the next level.
Now, around here, people have been watching the Road to the Pros series about Najee Harris. One of the things that stood out in there is he talked about wanting to leave Alabama, about going home to California, about feeling like he didn't really fit in to culture shock wise. Did any of that show up? Was anything of that stuff people knew? Was that a surprise to people, or is that something that people already knew had happened and knew about him?
I mean, first of all, I do think that the AL.com's Road to the Pro Series is really well done. Obviously I didn't have a hand in it, but I watched it and I thought they did a good job. But I don't think it's that much of a surprise, and it's not uncommon for players to think that, and then later on in their careers reveal it. I don't think that's something that we just necessarily talked with him about, but it doesn't come off as a surprise, because I think Tua, after going in the second half of that championship game in 2018 and winning it as a true freshman, he went back to Hawaii and talked about thinking about leaving if he didn't play in that game. So it goes through a lot of players' heads, especially the ones that are the highly rated recruits. But I also think that the people at Alabama, the people that have been there before, especially guys at his position, and we talked about it earlier in the show, running backs usually have to wait their turn a little bit to get the lion's share of the carries. And I think Najee sees now that he benefited from that. He talked about wanting to go home. He's a guy, I mean, he's a California kid. I remember when Alabama played Clemson in Santa Clara, and obviously Alabama lost that game pretty handily. But the media day there leading up to the game, Najee, again, he's not a guy that seeks out the limelight. He's not a guy that was really happy, I guess, about doing a lot of interviews. But he lit up when he saw all the guys from the San Francisco Chronicle or guys that he was around in his high school days. I think he was always probably been homesick to some degree. And to hear that he was considering that, though, it doesn't come as a surprise. It happens a lot more than you would think for players at Alabama. And again, though, I think he later revealed that he's very happy that he stuck around and played all 4 years at Alabama.
Watching some of Najee Harris's interviews and really all the kind of media that's surrounded him through this draft process, you see him on the Pat McAfee show and he's hilarious. And you see him on draft night and he's at the homeless shelter, and you see these other clips and he's supporting women's sports. Can you just take a couple minutes to really explain just his character, and if you've ever seen someone quite like him before?
No, he's unique. He really did start opening up with us probably the last year and a half. And I don't think we ever officially handed it out, but the local beat reporters, we do a Media Good Guy Award. And that goes to guys that, come up regularly. So they make themselves available and they give insightful answers. And again, I don't think this was something necessarily Najee liked to do early on in his career, but he started to loosen up, and the answers that you started to see come out on Twitter or whatever, he started doing that with us, and he was going to be our Media Good Guy Award if it was a normal year, and we did that stuff in person. So that just goes to show his maturation. But I think him as a person, you can just see, he's a guy that loves his family. He's loyal to his friends, and he likes to have fun. He seems like a guy that'd be really cool to hang out with. Obviously, that's not something us reporters do with the players back in Tuscaloosa, but I think that he is different. He's a little bit eccentric, but it's not to the point where he's going to be an issue. I know sometimes you see personality, especially with the running back position, and that might be a red flag, but I don't think that's a problem for Najee. He's a good person, and he might do things a little bit unorthodox, but I think at the end of the day, he's a guy that's going to work hard, and he's someone that you want to have in your locker room because he's going to bring out the best of some of his teammates.
Now, Pittsburgh is a smaller, it's a bigger city, but it's a smaller one. And we're a little obsessed with the Steelers to the point that a lot of times people come here and they don't realize everyone knows who you are here. Everyone has opinions on how you're playing, and you can't really escape what happens on the field each week. Does his time in Alabama, where it's also similarly a little crazy, does that really help students prepare, their athletes prepare for a situation in the pros where you are under a lot of scrutiny and people are constantly thinking about what you've done on the football field and everyone knows who you are? Is that a benefit to these men when they go into the NFL and face that kind of scrutiny?
Yeah, I mean, when you started your question, I automatically thought, well, Pittsburgh sounds a lot like Tuscaloosa. So yeah. I think with him going from California and not really knowing anything about the tradition of Alabama football and being immersed in it, and having people just walk up to him on campus or wherever he's at and saying "Roll Tide," and he not even knowing what that means, and eventually seeing the tradition and the history, I think that will prepare him. I think going from a place like Tuscaloosa to Pittsburgh, I think it's a great segue just in terms of that. I think there's only a few cities in the country from an NFL standpoint where you can get that, where it's similar to that small town college feel, even though Pittsburgh's a bigger city than Tuscaloosa. But and I think that's something that it was probably a bit of a culture shock for him to go from West Coast to down south and football craze. But I think that will prepare him for going to a place like Pittsburgh, where you say that they are, everybody's crazy about football and going to be, probably anytime he sees somebody asking him questions about the upcoming season or whatnot. I think it's a great preparation for a place like that, having played at Alabama.
I was listening to a Najee Harris interview, like I mentioned earlier, and one of his responses to people going up to him saying "Roll Tide," he would just respond with "War Eagle," which, if you don't know, the Auburn chant. So bitter rival. So he is just that dude. I don't know. It's just one of the interesting characters. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he fits in here in Pittsburgh. But just to get to one more football question before we let you out of here. I'm curious, Charlie, if you think he can start right away as a tailback in the NFL.
I think so. He's a guy, we've talked about his size. He's 6'2", 230. He's not going to be someone that you need to put weight on or anything like that. He's NFL ready. He's someone that's coming from a system where it's very similar to what you're going to see in the pros. And again, he has a lot of tread on his tires. I think he's someone that's hungry. Not only just from a football standpoint, but you see, like you talked about on those Road to Pros features, he's someone that's coming from essentially nothing. And he knows now that, there's a lot of work ahead of him to do. And I think that going to the next level, he's just going to be a guy that immediately goes to work. I don't think he waited very long after the national championship game, even though he was dealing with that ankle issue to start training for the draft. I'm sure that I've seen he's been in Pittsburgh. He's toured the city, the stadium, everything like that. I'm sure he's just itching to get to work. And yeah, I mean, it would not shock me at all to see him work his ass off in the preseason and be at the top of that pecking order on the running back depth chart whenever they kick off the season.
Jeffrey, do you have any other closing questions for Charlie?
No, I'm good.
All right, Charlie, before we let you out, we'll give you an opportunity to plug anything if you got anything coming up.
Thankfully, I don't. It's been the spring practice with the NCAA tournament. Obviously, the NFL draft. It's been busy. A lot of golf tournaments now. Following Nick Saban around and just seeing if he has anything new to say. So, thankfully, I don't have anything in the chamber. Hopefully, it'll be a couple of quiet months before we get back to SEC media days. But I'm always doing something, and if I do, it's at BamaOnline.com and. I share my stuff and everything on our staff that they do on Twitter at Charlie_Potter.
Charlie Potter, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed this one. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, so everyone that is currently listening on the audio platform side, you can flip over to part 2 now. Geoffrey and I will continue on just doing some Steelers stuff. But if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, just hang tough. We'll get in our break and be back on the other side. Thanks, Charlie. Okay, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is time for the second half of the Curtain Call podcast. My name is Michael Beck, once again joined by Geoffrey Benedict. Geoffrey, the draft is over. Rejoice. We can relax a little bit. How do you feel a week removed from a few days really, but the week after the draft?
I'm still working to get caught up, man. I am like neck deep in film rooms I'm working on. So I'm doing all right. I didn't have to do a film room on Najee Harris. That was Kevin Smith took that one, but I've been doing Pat Freiermuth and then Dan Moore, the offensive lineman. That one I kind of got in the weeds on and ended up with like 70 clips of film that I had to go through and whittle down to a reasonable number.
For everyone listening right now, I do want to mention we will have another guest to talk about Najee Harris in the second half of the second half show. So if you do the math, the last 15 minutes of this one, we'll get into some more on the Alabama running back and more of his kind of personal side. But there was a little bit of Steelers-ish related news today, Geoffrey, and that being Alejandro Villanueva's introductory press conference with the Baltimore Ravens. He kind of took a shot at TikTokers, kind of took a shot at the offense being one-dimensional, and you might be able to pin that on Ben. Do you think that's Alejandro actually trying to dig back at the Steelers, or is that just Big Al?
I think that's what happens when you get Alejandro Villanueva in front of cameras and with the media. He's got a reputation for being a goofy guy, and he stayed out of the media largely in Pittsburgh. He tried to stay out of the media, while at the same time, he would like show up on random videos. Like he would show up behind people and do stuff. So there's a little bit of that like attention goofball in there that's kind of, but at the same time, he kind of avoided the press. So I think you're just seeing a dude who's a little different. And if you've been around special forces people, like they're a little different. They're a different breed of people. And they're often have a weird side to them, like Alejandro Villanueva seems to have. I don't take any offense to it. I know people are upset that he went to the Ravens. I don't care. The Steelers didn't want him. It's not like he demanded more money or told him he wouldn't play for him anymore. The Steelers were like, yeah, we're done with you. So he went someplace else. And who wanted him? The Ravens. He went there. Now he's a Raven. You know what? He's going to come to Pittsburgh and do his best to beat us. That's what he's going to do. Just like I would expect Chris Wormley to come to the Steelers and not be like, oh, the Ravens are better. I like the Ravens better. I wish I was still a Raven, and I'm sad that I'm not because the Pittsburgh Steelers stink. And then like go play the Ravens and be like, I'm going to suck so that my old team will win. No one wants that. That'd be stupid. Alejandro Villanueva is a Raven now. He's going to do his best to be a Raven, respect what he did while he was here, and he's not here anymore. So whatever.
Yeah, honestly, when it comes to his comments today, the way I think about it is that he just genuinely doesn't like doing that. And if he's going to have to do media stuff, he's going to have some fun with it. And like he knows it's going to set off a firestorm online, but the guy still has a flip phone, so he doesn't care. So like, I think
he doesn't have to care if Pittsburgh flips out about it. Like for once, no one in the organization is going to be like, hey, Al, like seriously, don't set off the media and don't set off Pittsburgh fans. Like don't get him. No one in the Ravens organization will care. He doesn't have to worry about that now. So it doesn't matter. Like David DeCastro is one of his best friends. And they asked him about David DeCastro and he said, well, playing next to Kevin Zeitler will be an upgrade. Like it's just, I mean, come on. That's either he is going out of his way to burn every possible bridge he ever could, or he's just a weird dude that doesn't care and he's goofing off. And I doubt David DeCastro will care.
Oh, like when I heard that comment, I'm like, oh yeah, this guy's just having fun with this. He doesn't care about what's going on right now. He's just trying to have a good time. And really, the guy just signed a $14 million contract. He doesn't like doing the media. Whatever. Who cares? Like,
yeah.
If my biggest competition company came to me and said, "Hey, we'll double your salary," you know what I'd say? See you guys. Like I'm
a Ravens fan now.
Yeah, exactly. Like if Baltimore beat down said, "Hey, Mike, actually, I don't know if double would be enough to go right for Baltimore beat down," but
that'd be rough.
I'll have to come up with a number large enough. I don't know if it's been invented yet.
Yeah, you got like if they gave you a really, really great number,
I could be
to go cover the Cleveland Browns and live in Cleveland.
Oh, and live in Cleveland.
Yeah. You'd be like, you know what? Okay, I can try and get out of here later, but I'll take the money.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like life-changing money, how could anyone ever say no? That's one of the things I always think of. Is like, how can you blame a player for taking a huge raise? You can't, because you do the same thing.
Yeah, and you'd be dumb not to.
Oh, exactly. But speaking of free agents, we are now in the thick. I use air quotes because it hasn't been too busy yet, but of the post-compensatory free agency period. So now you can sign anyone without penalty. Do you expect the Steelers to sign someone? Because I know Keith Butler, after they drafted Quincy Roche, specifically mentioned, like, hey, our free agency isn't done yet, and we kind of expect to sign another outside linebacker. Does that make you believe, okay, you know what? They might actually bring someone else in?
Yeah, I don't think they're done. They usually do add some people late in the process after UDFAs and all those things. So I won't be surprised. I don't think it'll be any major acquisition. I don't expect that.
Nor do I get the Steelers move would be to sign Anthony Chickalo and Artie Burns. That'd be like the Steelers thing to do. It's like, oh, they were here once. Let's bring them back in, pay them nothing, but it's a body. Like that would be the Steelers thing to do. And like, I probably would feel the opposite of joy from those signings. So,
you know what, Chickalo, I'd be fine with. He knows everything here and he's done it forever. But I mean, that's kind of, those moves would kind of be desperation moves. You know what I'm saying? That wouldn't be like, that wouldn't be a move where you're sitting there saying, yes, we got better. It'd be like, well, we got someone who we know brings us a certain level of play.
Andrew Wilbar throws this in, so I'll bring this up. He asked us, do you think if the Steelers could scrap enough cash together, they could go after Eric Fisher? He has experience in the zone blocking scheme. Really, there are other names of tackles we could throw out. I know Dennis Kelly has kind of been a hot commodity these days, but I don't really anticipate the Steelers chasing another tackle, especially because they signed Joe Haig and drafted Dan Moore. And you look at this tackle depth chart and you're like, all of a sudden, like, man, like they couldn't fit someone else in. Like, would you agree with that, Geoffrey?
Yeah, I think so. You could always cut. I know you'd be a fan of cutting Joe Haig just for the compensatory process.
Well, he's not going to play anyway. So, and he struggled a lot last year. So that's where it comes from for me.
Yeah, like if you can get a veteran to come in for a similar rate. I don't know. This isn't my ballpark. This isn't something I'm familiar with. This would be a question for Dave Schofield. But if they signed like a guy for the same, like if you gave a veteran tackle the same contract you give Joe Haig and you cut Joe Haig, the way it seems to me is that would no longer be a negative on our compensatory formula. I believe. I could be completely wrong.
So I was looking it up because the compensatory formula changed a little bit this year, and it made me a little bit better about keeping Joe Haig around. If he plays less than his career average snaps, which if my memory serves me right, because I read it this morning, was 36.4% of the Steelers' offensive snaps. If he plays less than that, the Steelers could regain that. I believe it would be 6th-round selection that they would have gotten from Mike Hilton's loss. And it would also mean the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would lose one of their compensatory selections that they were supposed to receive. So it comes down to playing time. If he's the swing tackle, hopefully Dan Moore beats him because we know he's able to play both sides. Then ipso facto, all of a sudden they got their pick and they still have the player too. So I guess from that sense, it could work out.
But by the same token, when you're going for percentage of snaps, that means Mike Hilton, that's a factor for, the guys the Steelers just lost too. And Bud Dupree. That's a lot of snaps for Bud Dupree. That's a decent number of snaps for Mike Hilton. So we'll see I mean, we could lose picks from just, I mean, if Mike Hilton slips to like the fourth cornerback and barely plays, we're not getting money for him either.
If it does go on career average, though, I think it would, like, in that sense, I think that could like do a hit on Mike Hilton, because all those early years, and then the New England year, that was, he never played. And so I don't know, like there's some nuances to that I think we could probably take a couple hours to really dive into, but
yeah, it'll be one of those things that it's much harder to figure out until the season is pretty much over.
No, exactly. Outside of that, looking at the Steelers draft today, do you think this team is still good enough to compete in the AFC North and potentially win this title again?
I do. I think they are. I think the offense is going to be better. And people break down the offensive line. We've talked about this before, but the offensive line is close. Or, like the current offensive line that we have right now is at least close to what they had last year. And if you're looking at the games where they were banged up and J.C. Hassenauer was playing, this line should be significantly better than that line was. It should be significantly better just because it was in such a bad shape for those games. I think our depth is actually better. Maybe our starting lineup doesn't have the same, name recognition to it, same experience to it. But depending on what happens at center, I mean, you're swapping, for most of last season, you're swapping Alejandro Villanueva for Zach Banner, which is a boost to the run game and a negative in the passing game. Kevin Dotson's going to start. That's a boost. And then we lost Pouncey, which is a negative. His decline is overrated. People are just used to him being incredibly good. So that when he's kind of a, like average NFL center, it looked bad.
Continue looking at this class. Do you have a favorite pick?
I have a couple guys I really, really like. The center, Kendrick Green. Big fan of that pickup. I haven't. I'm trying to remember the 6th round pick, the edge rusher.
Roche.
Yeah. I haven't gotten into his film yet. I'm excited for that one. I had to get the lineman done first. So he's got potential. I loved the pick of Buddy Johnson. He's a good one. I love his profile. I love what he brought on the field. So I'm excited. Even the cornerback we selected, I was saying, we need to pick someone who fits the scheme, fits a role in the defense, not someone who can, just be a raw talent that we can hopefully mold into something. And that's exactly what this kid is. He is a guy who fits specific role in the defense and is going to have a chance to play in the dime and kind of fill that Cameron Sutton spot that Cam Sutton held as a dime back, like right away. He could be a guy who comes in and does that at a decent enough level because that's what he was best at in college. That's his exact strength.
Now, are you able to explain the Isaiah Loudermilk pick yet, or is it still, with the trade and the selection, is it still confusing?
To me, I don't know. I'm not going his film. I'm not doing that. Kevin did that. And as he said, as we've heard, I think Jeff Hartman stated it on one of his podcasts, but Kevin came to us even in the chat and was like, I don't understand this pick. Two things make sense to me. Two things are clear to me, I should say. One is the Steelers specifically wanted him. The Steelers specifically wanted Isaiah Loudermilk, because they traded up specifically to get him. That is a move for a player, not just we need a defensive lineman. They wanted him specifically. And the second thing is, yeah, his college film may not look great. Yeah, he wasn't looked on as great, but I go back to Carlos Davis. I have never seen college film as bad as what I saw from Carlos Davis coming out of Nebraska. Like, I have never seen college film that bad, where he would just come out of his snap and already be like, he'd come out of his stance and the guy's already getting driven backwards. There were plays he was like flailing at people. It looked like slap fighting when he would try and do a pass rush move. It looked like the stereotypical view of like teenage girls slapping at each other. That's what his hand work. It was terrible. He came in week 9 and looked good for the Steelers. He looked like an NFL defensive lineman. He's one of the guys I'm excited for. So for me, like they wanted him specifically, and if Carl Dunbar wanted him specifically, then you know what? I'm okay with them trading up, and I'm okay with them doing that. Because Dunbar, like, he may not have found like diamonds in the rough yet. You know, he's not sitting there turning 4th round guys into Cam Hayward, but he has found a lot of players and had them now like solid contributors. Isaiah Buggs played well last year. Carlos Davis played well last year. Even Henry Mondeau, who's undersized and like doesn't really fit in the NFL, he played really well last year for a backup. So I'll give Dunbar the benefit of the doubt and say, let's visit this kid in a year.
With that, we'll get back to our topic at hand here, and we'll welcome in Roger Myers from Roll Bama Roll into the conversation. Roger, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Oh, doing quite
great, man.
well.
Good to have you.
Glad to be here. I heard your names there, Dunbar and Isaiah Buggs. So
yeah,
both Alabama ties.
Yep,
exactly. So one of the reasons why we were specifically pointed your direction tonight was that you've had a connection with Najee Harris. Can you talk a little bit on what your interactions with that running back have been?
Well, he's just we met mostly because we've gotten to be good friends with Jedrick Will's parents and whole family. When he was here, and Naji and Jedrick came in together, and we're very close. So along with Leatherwood and Tua and some of those guys, so got to be around him a little bit through that, and he's just as great a player as he is. He's just a fantastic human being. Has an amazing personality that's going to resonate with people. He just lights up a room when he comes in, and he just I know you've been seeing a lot of interviews and things where his personality is showing through, and he's just really a unique young man, with a backstory that's not many people have had to go through, and for him to come out of all that and his whole family, it's just really a great story, and just real heartwarming to see what kind of human being he's turned into be.
With that kind of personality, what kind of impact did that have on his fellow teammates?
I think it was a great, particularly the last couple of years once he became full-time starter. I think he was kind of feeling his way around the first year, and particularly he was, and he's said this in some of the little videos that have been out about his journey to the pros. He was homesick, culture shock. Said, like the kids from South Florida, he couldn't even understand what they were saying from the South in general. But he mentioned the ones from like Miami, which would have been Judy and Jerry Judy and some of those guys. And then it comes in as the number one player in the country. And I mean, he had 40 carries as a freshman or something, like he didn't. He was playing behind Damian Harris and Josh Jacobs, and there wasn't a lot of carries to go around. And then it picked up his sophomore year, and I think he started coming out a little bit more. And then when Jacobs left and he became the full-time guy his junior year, he really it really came forward. But this senior year, particularly with all the strife in the country and all that, he really took a big leadership role. And he's the one that went and talked to Coach Saban about having the march before the season started, where the whole team marched to a famous landmark at the university where George Wallace had stood in the schoolhouse door to try to keep black students from entering back in the 60s. So they ended up there, and Naji just took a real big leadership role in that, and went to Coach Saban and said that we want to do this, and Coach Saban told him, well, thank you. I'm glad you did, because if I'd have said it, it wouldn't have been right. I needed you guys to come to me and say, let's do this. He said, I'm all in. So they went from there. So that kind of cemented that this guy has leadership qualities and people following. And it just went from there. And he was just so good this year. I mean, you could always see the talent, but he just really busted loose this year. And in my eyes, was by far the best running back in the country.
What kind of person did the Pittsburgh Steelers just add to their team over this past weekend? What kind of personality are they welcoming into the locker room? They're gonna be incredibly impressed with this young man. Just everything about him, his way he carries himself, the way he works. I mean, his work ethic is incredible. He's got a playful side to his personality, joking around and stuff. But when it's business time, it's business time, and they're gonna get everything out of him. And then the fan base, the players are gonna love him. The fan base is gonna love him. He's just that he's got that it factor where people are drawn to him, and and he'll say funny things, and it's just I think a perfect fit for the culture of Pittsburgh. I mean, just following them over the years with, they've always had a strong running game. I started watching them with Franco Harris and Rocky Blyer when I was a kid, and just have kind of watched them through. I think skill-wise, maybe some Le'Veon Bell type things, because he can really catch the ball. And didn't get a lot of chance to do that early in his career. In the last couple of years, he did. And SEC championship game, he caught 3 touchdown passes, and then he caught another one in the championship game. And he's a great blocker. He pass blocker, which was something he had to work on, because obviously coming out of high school was the number one guy. I'm sure they didn't call on him to block very often, but if you're going to play at Alabama, you have to do that. And he got better and better as the years went on, and he was outstanding this past season in that role. But I think the community is going to fall in love with him. I think he'll have all type of chances for advertising type things. I think people will just really, really fall in love with him, with his personality and his work ethic and his production on the field.
One of the things we talked about with our previous guest was the culture shock of coming from California to Alabama, but also the kind of incredible focus on Alabama football that there is in that area.
Right.
And I kind of was thinking, because he came from a school, watching those Road to the Pros videos. Yeah. He came from a school where he was saying, even though he was like the number one guy in the country around there, people didn't really even know who he was. Right. Like, he wasn't a big deal in his hometown. And to go from that kind of a situation where he was a big fish and like, hey, I want people to know who I am, and then coming to an Alabama where everything you do is under a microscope, and everyone knows who you are. Everyone knows what you're doing. Even if you're not getting, even if you're not getting reps in the game, people are going to know who you are. Right. How much of a shock was that to Najee Harris to being under that kind of a microscope?
I think it was a severe shock, and he, and even that first year, and Tua went through the same thing. It's like, Tua was playing behind Jalen Hurts, and he played in like 9 games his freshman year and threw, like under 100 passes. And then Naji, like I said, had 30 or 40 carries, and it's like, man, we're the number one guys in the country. We're not playing, and they both kind of got disgruntled in a way, but they fortunately, in the championship game that year, their freshman year, that's when they came in and saved the day when Tua replaced Jalen at halftime in the Georgia game, and they were behind. And a lot of people don't know, Jonah Williams got hurt at left tackle. Alex Leatherwood came in, true freshman. Naji came in as the main running back in the fourth quarter during the comeback. Had Devontae and Judy and Ruggs in, all true freshmen. So they had the most important game of the year and the most important time of the year. They're running 7 true freshmen out there that really did not play all that much that year. And Naji ripped off 4 or 5 just 15, 18, 20-yard runs to help lead the comeback. Of course, when Tua hit Devontae with the winning pass in overtime. And so that getting that playing time, reinforced that we do need to come, we need to stay here. We need to stick with it. And I don't know how serious they really were about leaving, but, I can understand, hey, are we going to be buried, in this depth chart for a whole career? But they showed what they had at the biggest time and then just improved from there.
Well, what do you think Najee Harris' biggest strength is when he's on the field? What's he going to really gash opposing defenses on the most?
Gosh. In the NFL, it might be catching the ball out of the backfield. But, I mean, he's always going to get 3, 4, 5, 8 yards. In college, it was more like 6, 8, 10 yards on a carry when you don't think he has anything there. In NFL, he's going to get that 4 yards, 5 yards on each carry. And then he, as he went on, people say he doesn't have top end speed, breakaway speed, but this year he ended up with 8 or 10, 35, 40-yard touchdown runs. But he was closing in on the career rushing record over Derrick Henry at one point, very, very close behind him. And the longest run of his career at that point had been like 25 yards. And then late in the season, he started stacking up 35, 40-yard breakaways. But he's always going to get positive yards. You just didn't see him get stopped at the line of scrimmage or lose yards. And he fumbled one time in his career, and it actually shouldn't have been a fumble. It was a play at the goal line where he was stacked up and being pushed backwards, and like 5 seconds later, the ball comes out and they ruled it a fumble. So ball security is fantastic. Blocking's great. Catching the ball's great. So you just got a complete guy. He's a three down back whatever league he plays in.
Geoffrey, if you have any more questions you want to offer Roger before we get to the top of the hour here, I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah, I've got one last question.
Okay.
Najee Harris is touted for being a leader across the board. Every time anyone speaks about him, they talk about his character and his leadership, and yet he wasn't a team captain.
Yeah, I almost got to that earlier. Yeah.
Okay, can you speak to that?
Well, all I can say is you can only have 4, and these teams had incredible leadership. And he was more, I don't think he minded that so much, that he was going to do his thing regardless if he had a title on it or not. And I mean, they went, when you have the Heisman Trophy winner, you have the Outland Trophy winner, you have the quarterback that was in the top 3 in the Heisman vote, and then you have obviously defensive guys too. It's like there's only so many picks to go around. But it was a little unusual. Devontae was captain junior and senior year, and then so it was Devontae and Tua and I think Jedrick is last year, and then this year it was Leatherwood, Devontae, and Mack, and then one defensive guy. So it's just like there's a lot of spots to go around, and it's almost like he showed leadership and saying, "Hey, elect these guys. I'm going to be leading you. I'm going to lead regardless if I have a title or not." I mean, I don't think it was an indication or a marker that he wasn't respected or liked or anything like that. I just think is a numbers game.
Terrific. But I guess before we sign out today, Roger, we really want to thank you for your time coming on and sharing some expert analysis on one of the newest Pittsburgh Steelers and Alabama Crimson Tide greats. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And I guess one other thing we got to do before we sign out, Geoffrey, yourself, if you have anything you want to plug that's coming out on our website.
Look for my film room. I got 2 film rooms coming out, one on pass blocking, one on run blocking for the Steelers' 4th round pick, Dan Moore Jr. Those are coming out, and just stay tuned to the website.
And as for me, I just want to, as always, remind everyone to click over to BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, your one-stop shop for all things Pittsburgh Steelers. Also, if you love the draft coverage and you missed some articles and you want to learn some more about some of these players, you can go back. There are some streams that talk about exactly what the Steelers were able to do in the draft. Some film rooms that I know are coming out every single day, some knee-jerk reactions, everything you could really ask for when it comes to analysis on this draft. It's on there at BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. And one last thing before we go, also got to mention, if you're listening on YouTube or Facebook right now, you're not getting all of our podcast content. You're missing out on Jeff Hartman's Let's Ride that airs 3 times a week. You got Dave Schofield's Stat Geek, which comes out tomorrow morning. That would be Thursday morning. And my Live Mike, which comes out every Tuesday. So make sure you're heading over to Apple Podcasts or Pandora or Spotify, really wherever you get your podcasts from. We're on there. Just search BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. I guarantee it will pop up. So once again, thank you for tuning in. For Geoffrey, Benedict, my name is Michael Beck. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week.